So, shall we get start? Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the 2020 Ohio AAPI Community Candidate Forum. I'm Nin Chi, Vice President of APAPA Ohio State Chapter. APAPA is a nonprofit and nonpartisan organization with 30 chapters and over 20,000 members nationwide. Its mission is to inspire and engage Asian Americans through leadership development, community service, and voter registration. APAPA Ohio State chapter was founded 3 years ago and has grown rapidly with members from all major cities across the state. The election is about 2 weeks away, and early voting has started in Ohio. Tonight, APAPA Ohio is very honored to have candidates from the congressional, state, and county level to join us and share their visions on the issues we care about. This forum is hosted in collaboration with other AAPI organizations, including Asian Services in Action, Civic Leadership USA, S Network, and Ohio Chinese American Association. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome Michelle Young, Advisory Chair of APAPA Ohio, to introduce our moderator. Michelle is a warm-hearted attorney and who has always helps others to fight for justice in Cincinnati area. Recently, she was named as one of the Enquirer's 2020 Women of the Year by the Cincinnati Enquirer. With that, let's welcome Michelle.
Michelle, you're muted.
Michelle, I have seen extraordinary leadership in Ling and Howe and in Vincent Wang in creating an organization that now reaches across the state and encourages and gives so many opportunities to Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders from childhood onwards to feel part of the civic culture, part of the community. And tonight is a really, really special night for us. 2018, we had our first forum, and tonight we have forums. We have a forum in another city. We have forums across the state, and the lineup here is just extraordinary. With that in mind, I want to now introduce Kyle Inslet. He is the local anchor for Channel 12. He's also a superstar in every way, including generosity. He has been working all day until 7, and he took time off so he could be here for us and allow us to have the best, and I'm going to say it straightforward, Paula's the female anchor, but the best male anchor in all of America. Kyle, thank you for coming in and being there with us.
Michelle, you are too kind. I want to say thank you to you, and thank you to APAPA for having me out here tonight. And I don't want to take a lot of time off the top because we want to get down to the questions. We want to make sure that we have enough time for all of our candidates that have been so gracious in giving of their time this evening. I do want to briefly go over the ground rules for how tonight is going to operate. So each of the candidates that are running for congressional or statewide offices will have 2 minutes to give a self-introduction. Then they will have 3 minutes to respond to a prepared question that was submitted by the organization sponsoring this debate. For local candidates, you will get 1.5 minutes for a self-introduction. Then you also have 1.5 minutes for a prepared question. And we've also allocated some time for candidates to respond to questions that came from audience members. So our first race tonight is one that I'm quite familiar with because I moderated a debate between 2 of the candidates just about a week ago. We're talking about the congressional race for Ohio's 1st district. And the first person that we are going to hear from is from Mr. Steve Shabbat. So Mr. Shabbat, you now have 2 minutes for a self-introduction. So if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, the floor is yours now for 2 minutes. Oh, you're still muted, Mr. Shabbat.
Did that work?
That works. We can hear you.
All right, excellent. Sorry about that. It's great to be with everyone this evening. I participated in a similar forum about 2 years ago, and it was great meeting so many folks. Back then, we were able to do it in person. Unfortunately, because of COVID, so many things are being done virtually to keep us all safe. And so that's why this was necessary. But I want to thank APAPA for putting this together. I want to thank Michelle, especially. Michelle and I actually ran against each other a few years back. I guess it was back in 2016, and we've become very good friends. And I want to thank her for the great work that she's done for the community for such a long time. And maybe I'll give you a little bit of my background. I was a school teacher and then got involved in politics. I ran for Cincinnati City Council as an independent and lost, and then I ran as a Republican and lost, and finally won my third time and served on council for about 5 years. I was a Hamilton County Commissioner for about 5 years, and I've been in the United States Congress now. This is my 24th year. I'm on 3 committees. I'm on the Judiciary Committee. I'm on the Small Business Committee, and I was the chairman of the committee. I'm now the ranking member, lead Republican on the committee. And my goal is always to try to bring results for the people here in the 1st Congressional District. And I'm happy to say that in the PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program, we were trying to save as many small businesses across the country as possible. And there are 16 congressional districts in Ohio. Our district, the 1st Congressional District, we got more money through the PPP program, almost $3 billion. More small businesses got loans, about 17,000. Most importantly, more jobs were saved. Over 250,000 jobs here in the greater Cincinnati area in our district were saved than any other district in Ohio. And that meant a lot to not just the businesses, but especially to those employees and the families that they support. So those are 2 of the committees. The other committee is the Foreign Affairs Committee.
Give about 15 seconds, Mr. Shabbat.
15 seconds. Okay. Well, on the Foreign Affairs Committee, I've been very active. I'm the co-chair of the Congressional Taiwan Caucus, the Philippine Caucus, Cambodian Caucus, very active. And if we can be of any help in visas, immigration issues, please contact my office. We'll be glad to serve you, and look forward to answering a question here shortly.
We're actually going to do that question right now. Stick with me. It's a bit of a long one. It says, Rep. Jamie Raskin, Chair of the Committee on, Chair of the Committee on Oversight and Reform Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, Chair of the Congressional Caucus, have been investigating the targeting of Chinese American scientists as potential spies. Quote, while there are undoubtedly authentic and legitimate cases of espionage that should be investigated, these reports have created serious concern that innocent people are being swept up in this initiative. Now, will you or are you providing support for this initiative to provide greater oversight over federal agencies?
Well, we certainly never want to have anyone the focus of an investigation who is innocent. And we need to make sure that innocent people don't get swept up in any kind of investigations of any sort. We have had problems with the PRC, the People's Republic of China, in recent years. There has been spying. There has been the theft of intellectual property for many companies and individuals. And oftentimes when our plants are opened up over in China, they have to partner up with the government in essence. And after a couple of years, the government oftentimes ends up more or less taking over the company and stealing intellectual property and taking over the secrets. And that means lost jobs right here in the United States. So we have to be very careful about that. Again, we want to make sure that human rights are protected, that nothing inappropriate is done. But China, for quite some time, hasn't been operating under the same rules that the United States has. We have made it very easy, for example, in trade deals for China to get their products into the United States. If you go to Walmart, for example, and shop there, if you turn something over, there's a pretty good chance that it's going to be made in China. So we make it quite easy for them to sell their products here in the United States. But so we need to have, yes, free trade and open trade, but it has to be fair. So we have to make sure that we're allowing our companies here to grow and create more jobs for American citizens.
15 seconds, Mr.
So that has been a challenge over time. So anyway, I want to again thank APAPA for putting this forum on here this evening, and look forward to participating. And if my office can ever be of any help, please let us know.
All right, Mr. Shabbat, we're going to have one more question for you in just a bit. Right now, we want to turn to Kate Schroeder. And Kate, the floor is yours now for a 2-minute self-introduction.
Thank you, Kyle, and thanks, APAPA, for putting this on, and to everybody who is tuning in. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. I am Kate Schroeder, and I'm the Democratic nominee for Congress here in the 1st District, and I'm running because I believe we need change. We have so many real and pressing problems right now between the pandemic, racial injustices, our economy, and we're not going to solve them with the status quo. I think for too long, we've been electing leaders that divide us and pull us apart. And I believe the majority of us want leaders that bring us together and get things done. I am a low ego mom who knows how to de-escalate. I have a 5- and 7-year-old. I do it every day. And that is the attitude that I want to bring to Congress. And I'm also someone who spent my career bringing business skills to public health and having a track record of results. I went to Indiana University for undergrad. I have my MBA from the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School. And I've spent 15 years in healthcare, including 2 years living in Zambia. I've led multi-million-dollar projects across India, Kenya, Nigeria, Uganda to reduce drug prices 40% for kids and expand treatment access from 1 million to 55 million kids. And I've spent a lot of time in South Asia, been to India over 20 times, and it's part of who I am. I'm running because I believe we need leaders that really prioritize helping our community. And I think the role of government is to make a meaningful impact on people's lives. I'm focused on expanding access to healthcare, rebuilding our middle class, and addressing racial injustices. And those will be my priorities. I am incredibly grateful to be endorsed by the Asian American Action Fund, both the national and tri-state chapter here, and to have the opportunity to have met with a number of our Asian American groups in this community. I've met with the Nepalese and Bhutanese community, have done a number of events with the medical community, the South Asian medical community up in the Mason area, and really appreciate the opportunity to be considered for this role. And to me, it's time where we need leaders that are really focused on bringing us together, using more responsible language, not inflammatory, and helping to make a positive impact in our community.
All right, thank you, Ms. Schroeder. Let's go ahead and get to your question from the committee, and it's another long one, so bear with me for a moment. It says, Asian Americans have been subject to increasing racial bias and harassment in the past few months. The National Stop AAPI Hate Group has documented 2,583 incidents of anti-Asian American discrimination from March through August of this year alone. What is your plan to address racial, national origin bias and create a safe environment for all Ohioans, and then specifically for AAPIs? And you will now have 3 minutes to respond to this.
Thanks for the question, Kyle. It's so important. The racial bias and the hate that we are seeing is not okay. And we need leaders to stand up and say that. And we need legislation and our federal government to play a role in shining a light on this and creating policies that protect us, that protect our kids in our schools. I support efforts to stop the discrimination and bullying that's taking place in our schools, because I do think we need to start at those levels. And we also, in our police departments, we need to look at ways, where there are practices of racial profiling, how can we limit that and address it in those settings as well? And as I think it's one of the things that upsets me the most is an administration that is fanning the flames of hate. And that is dangerous. It is leading to this increase that you're talking about. I'm seeing it in my life that the people that I know that are minorities, they're afraid to go out. And so, one thing is really just electing leaders who use responsible language, who bring us together instead of fanning these flames and making it okay for this racial bias, for this hate. It's not okay. And as the viewers here know, it's impacting their lives and their safety and the security of their families. And so I do believe that we need very strong language and protections at the federal level so that it covers all of our states and all of our cities in anti-discrimination and protections for our most vulnerable communities. And I guess one last thing I'll say is just, to me, it's the question of what is the role of government? And to me, the role of government, it is not to ensure success and happiness to everyone, but it's to ensure that everyone has a fair shot at success and happiness. And it's also to root out injustices, racial injustices, economic injustices, legislative injustices. And so I do believe we have the federal government has a responsibility, particularly for our most vulnerable communities that are subject to discrimination and don't have the same opportunities and access, whether it's in education, in our healthcare system, and access to capital, in employment that others do. That is where we need a strong federal government to play a role in anti-discrimination and ensuring that everyone has equal access.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Schroeder. I'm going to go off script just for a moment. So to the organizers, just bear with me for a quick moment. Kevin Kahn, I want you to do your 2-minute self-introduction here. Then we will go back to the questions from the audience. In fairness, I want to do all 3 candidates in this race at the same time. So Mr. Kahn, you're up now.
Okay, thank you very much. And yeah, I am Kevin Kahn. Thank you for having me. I am the Libertarian Party candidate for Congress here in the 1st District of Ohio. I'm a local business owner. Actually own 2 businesses, one here in Cincinnati and one in overseas in Dalian, China. And what I specialize in is exporting made in the USA industrial products. And I work with about 8 factories around the country, 3 of them here in Cincinnati. And I'm real, proud of the work we do because it helps bring and keep well-paying middle-class manufacturing jobs here in the US. I think about 65% of the business I do are products that are made right here in the Cincinnati area. And my work had me traveling a lot. I was probably gone 65% of the time. COVID kind of grounded me and has enabled me to spend some time more than I expected on the campaign, which is great. But when I was traveling and I was involved civically here, I was a member of the Greater Cincinnati Chinese Chamber of Commerce for over a decade. I was on the board of directors for 6 years and in the executive committee for 5 of those as a vice chair and also as a treasurer. I currently serve on my son's high school board for one of the sports teams, the ice hockey team, and I was a local coach for ice hockey here in Cincinnati and also in Dayton, working with hundreds of youth, teaching them about sport and life. And I call myself an accidental candidate. I'm not a career politician, and it wasn't a goal of mine. My wife is Mongolian. She was born there. I have 2 kids. One was born here in Cincinnati, and one was born in Mongolia. And during the summertime, we go back there so she can spend time with her family and the kids with their cousins. And we had a really negative interaction summer of 2019 coming back through customs and immigration. Where
about 15 seconds.
Okay, where I was challenged on the veracity of whether my 1.5-year-old daughter was actually mine, despite the passports and the birth certificates, and made the decision that our government has gotten too big, and as the people, we are able to limit the amount of power that we give to it, and it's time to set it back to a constitutionally mandated size.
All right, so your question is, Mr. Kahn, what is your view on current immigration policy, and what would you do differently?
I think it's way too stringent. I think that we need to get back to basically like an Ellis Island model. I think economically we can say that immigration is good for the economy. People who come here as immigrants are generally entrepreneurial. They want to help their communities. They want to start businesses. They're looking for good jobs. And I think that we've seen studies that crime rates among immigrants are lower than among Native Americans, and it is not a burden to have people coming here. This year with COVID, we're talking a lot about the healthcare system, and I've looked into that, and 17% of our healthcare workers in hospitals and doctors, nurses, and even in the elderly care are immigrants. Every year, we have medical students about 2,000 a year, who finish their studies here, and they come here because it's the best in the world. And then we tell them that they can't stay because we don't have enough residencies for them. And imagine how we can help our communities if we bring these people in. You know, we've got technology where we can do, you know, good criminal background checks and health checks, and let them come, and, as you know, assuming that they've passed everything, give them their work permit and say, welcome to America. Don't expect any welfare. You know, have at it. We wish you luck. And, you know, we welcome your contribution. We are the melting pot. All of our forefathers and foremothers came here from somewhere else. And we need to be the beacon of liberty and opportunity and offer the American dream to the world.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Khan. We're now going to go back to the portion where we take questions from audience members. The first one will go to Mr. Shabbat, and I'm going to read it directly off the chat here. Mr. Shabbat, the question is, I am very concerned with increasing racism against the Chinese community. I have a question for Mr. Shabbat about why he did not support the House Resolution 908 condemning all racism against Asians. And again, that is a question, Mr. Shabbat, directly from one of the viewers of tonight's debate. And you will now have 2 minutes to respond to that.
Yeah. Well, oftentimes we have what we call gotcha legislation, and that was pure politics, that particular legislation. And virtually all Republicans voted against it because it really wasn't a serious piece of legislation. What we do need is we need to make sure that we have both sides, Republicans and Democrats, working together. That's what I've always done. When I introduce legislation, I almost always get a Democratic co-sponsor to introduce it along with me. That's one of the reasons that I'm so effective. For example, UVA, University of Virginia, Vanderbilt, they've done studies in recent years over who are the most effective members of Congress. And I've come in the top 10 out of 435 members of Congress both times for getting legislation passed, because even though I'm a Republican, I work with Democrats. Perfect example of that is on the Small Business Committee. When I was chair of the committee the last two Congresses, Nydia Velasquez, who is from Puerto Rico, she's a Democrat. She's a very liberal Democrat. I'm a pretty conservative Republican, but we work together. We get things done in that committee. And that's the way I operate in Congress. That's why we've gotten so many pieces of legislation passed. And I've done that in the international context as well. It's the reason that they've named me as the co-chair of so many caucuses. I mentioned 3 of them relative to Asia. I'm co-chair, and there's a Democratic co-chair along with me for the Cambodian caucus, for the Taiwanese caucus, and for the Philippine caucus. And there are a lot of problems in each of those countries. Cambodia, especially with Hun Sen, who's been brutally repressing his people for a long time. And I met with him. I met with
15 seconds left, Mr. Shabbat.
Leaders, Aung San Suu Kyi in Burma, and so we have to make sure that there are no biases, that people are not discriminated against in this country. But you got to have people working together to accomplish that. And that's what I always try to do. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Shabbat. Ms. Schroeder, the question for you, and I'm reading it again directly from one of our participants tonight. It says, Kate, you mentioned that you have been to India several times. What are some of your takeaways from India, and how have you been able to apply those to your current campaign?
Yes, thank you for that question. So I've spent most of the parts, I've worked a bunch in the northern part of India, in Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and particularly around pediatric treatment for diarrhea, the #2 killer of kids globally. About 500,000 kids die from that. So I've worked in public health for a long time. And one of my top lessons is there are so many preventable deaths, right? And inequities in our health system. And what I saw in India was that you might have, a really amazing hospital in Delhi, New Delhi, in the capital, but when you're out in Jabrali, in a small town in Madhya Pradesh, like, that is very different, and they do not have the same access. And those inequities are very similar here in our first district. We have a difference in average lifespan of up to 25 years, depending on what zip code you were born in this district. That is not okay. And similar inequities exist in India. And some of the same lessons apply, where It's about access and understanding and listening to the communities that you're trying to reach to understand what their challenges are. And that means having good data on who are the kids that are dying, the kids that are getting sick and not getting the treatment, and why. Listening to them. Maybe the information's not getting to them in the correct language. I know that is a common barrier in our communities here. If you're trying to reach a minority community that doesn't have that same language. It's also one of the things with diarrhea treatment. A lot of them were getting to health facilities or little drug kiosks, but they would not, they would get antibiotics instead of the correct treatment because the drug vendors were giving out the wrong thing to the parent. And so what we had thought was it was another problem was actually that it was too expensive. But in fact, one of the biggest issues was the parents were not being told what the correct
seconds left.
Treatment was. So the lesson for me is really you have to work with these communities and listen to them to address these inequities, and the fundamental premise of just accepting that it is not okay to have these inequities and that it is possible to address them if we work together.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Schroeder. We also want to thank the other two candidates in the race for Ohio's 1st Congressional District, Mr. Shabbat and Mr. Khan, for being with us tonight. Thank you all so much. Best of luck to all of you on Election Day. It will be here before you know it. So happy campaigning to all of you.
Thank you
very much.
We are now going to move to the race for Ohio's 2nd Congressional District. We are going to begin with Jamie Castle. You will now have 2 minutes for a self-introduction.
I have my own timer going. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity to address the members here. My name is Jamie Castle. I am a lifelong Ohioan. I grew up in Green Hills, and now I live in Mount Washington. My parents retired out to Adams County, and that's still in my district. If you are not familiar with District 2, we have most of the eastern side of Hamilton County with a pocket in the middle of the central portion, all of Claremont, all of Highland, Pike, all of Brown, Adams, part of Ross, part of Scioto. It goes all the way to Portsmouth, all the way up to Chillicothe. It is vast, but it is beautiful. I am a teacher for Cincinnati Public Schools. I also have a small business that I started when I was home raising my kids. They are now 12 and 10. And the reason I'm running for Congress is because back in November, my current representative was a part of the impeachment hearings, and I just didn't like the tone that he was giving to the people he was asking questions of, and I wanted a change. I didn't see enough happening for our district. So I thought, I want somebody else, but no one had stepped up yet. So I stepped up myself, and it has been a whirlwind. I never imagined campaigning during a pandemic, but here we are. My district has 1.39% an Asian community. And as far as my background experience with Asian folks, Asian American folks, I worked in the restaurants part-time while I was putting myself through school and paying off my student loans and working part-time at a restaurant owned by Thai immigrants. So I got to work with them and see their struggles, as well as I have many friends here that have backgrounds. I did get to go to Cambodia as well. So I have some insight, but I promise to be one that is accessible and is always going to listen and be an advocate for all the people here.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Castle. The next question, I think you're quite suited to answer as a teacher. It says, what would you do to improve the funding infrastructure for local public school systems? And you will now have 3 minutes to respond to that.
So yeah, we have a problem here in Ohio. It was actually deemed in 1997 as unconstitutional. The way that we fund our schools is based on property values. And that is a problem because if you have a home in a neighborhood that is poor, that means your school is poor. It is not getting the funding it needs. And we need to fix that system. It's ridiculous that it hasn't been looked at and fixed in that amount of time. So we need to find a better way to fund these schools so that they have an equal footing. I am a huge proponent for public schools. My kids go to public schools. I work at public schools, and I love the diversity there. I think there's so much value in that. But we need to make sure that these folks that are coming from lower incomes aren't struggling because they're not getting the resources that they need. these are the schools that should be getting those resources. So we need to find a better way to fund schools. If it's a matter of keeping it with property taxes, then we need to put it all together and disperse it in a fair way. But we need to look at other options as well. I think with states all being different in the way that they run, we should look at who is being successful. And I think the federal government needs to prioritize the value of education and public education. The whole voucher and charter schools, they're taking away from folks that need it the most. And that needs to be more equitable as well. I think we need to really look at facilitating improvements in getting more teachers and supporting them and making sure their school loans are affordable and not a cause to not go into teaching. I think we need to subsidize that and make
15
sure we have,
seconds left.
the best folks there to help them and give them what they need. We prioritize education, and that's an investment in our people.
All right, thank you. Your question from the audience is, how will you protect the Chinese American community from collateral damages due to increasing tension between the US and China? How do you support the Chinese American community when there is increasing racism against Asians because of racist rhetoric used by President Trump and other GOP politicians? Just to clarify, again, this question is coming from the organizers of tonight's event. It is not created by me.
So that is a very important question, and that begins at the top. When Trump was using the term China virus, that was causing damage to our Asian American, brothers and sisters here. Even my opponent now has a new campaign out, and it's all about blaming China. And I don't think that that is productive, and I think it is dangerous, because we need to, number one, from the top say, Asian Americans, you are Americans, we support you. What do you need? And you are not the victim or the person that we should be angry at. I have friends that, get that pushback from people saying, go back to where you came from. And that's not okay. They're getting bullied, they're getting terrorized. We need to, from the top, as leaders, support these communities and push back against that kind of hate. It's not okay here. We will not tolerate it. I, for one, will be an example of that and make sure in my rhetoric and in my actions, everything I do, that I'm showing up, I am listening, I'm supporting, and I'm pushing back when any injustice happens with this community. I want to be a champion for all the people here, and I think it would be the greatest honor for me to serve in this capacity.
All right, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
All right, we are now going to move to some state Senate races. And the first one that we have tonight is State Senator Kathy Widenant. And Ms. Widenant, you will now have 2 minutes for a self-introduction. And I got to give you the award for the best background tonight. I love it.
Well, thank you. Certainly, we've all gotten used to campaigning virtually. So good evening, everyone, and thank you. I am Kathy Widenant, and I'm running for state senate in the 4th district, which is almost all of Butler County. And I'm running because we deserve a senator who will fight for families instead of special interests. I'm a graduate of Miami University. My husband, Jim, and I have 4 children, and we are small business owners. I am proud that my extended family is racially and culturally diverse, and I have learned so much through the experiences of my nieces and nephews. But really, through volunteering in our schools, I've been able to better understand the challenges of language barriers for English language learners, and especially the parents at home who are often limited in their English. We need more pathways of support so that new Americans can thrive. I started thinking about running for office after working on a Lakota school levy a few years back, and that is really when I learned about Ohio's school funding model, which has been declared unconstitutional by the Ohio Supreme Court multiple times because it over-relies on property taxes, which isn't only a burden for some people, but it sets up inherent inequities between districts. We really need to change that at the state level. We're still living through a pandemic, and it's hit communities of color especially hard. We're facing a tough economy as a result, but so many families here were already hurting before the pandemic. There really is a lot of important work to be done, but our state house is mired in an ongoing culture of corruption. And for the 4th time in recent years, Columbus has been rocked by scandal. And once again, taxpayers are left holding the bag. It's time to restore some ethics and elect a senator who will fight for important issues like getting the pandemic under control.
15 seconds.
and digging back out from under the resulting economic downturn, protecting and expanding access to affordable health care, and fixing our school funding process and investing in public schools, and ending the culture of corruption. It's time we focus on families first and put people over politics. I'm proud to be endorsed by the Asian American Action Fund, and I ask for your vote for state senate if you live in Butler County.
Let's turn now to your prepared question, and it reads as follows. So small businesses are critical for our economies and communities. Here in Ohio, there are more than 21,000 businesses owned by AAPI that employ about 64,000 workers and account for revenue of nearly $11 billion. Yet many AAPI business owners face linguistic and cultural obstacles in maintaining and supporting their businesses, including having access to federal and state resources. What would you do to help promote and grow AAPI businesses? And you'll have 2 minutes to respond to that. Excuse me, 3 minutes.
Okay, sure. Well, the first thing that I think we need to do is have a greater understanding of the disparities and where the challenges lie for AAPI business owners so that we can work to better meet their needs. We know that we're small business owners ourselves, and funding is always a challenge for small businesses and especially for startups. And I will work to make it easier for small businesses and micro businesses to access the capital that they need and also the support and mentoring that they really, really need. That includes working to ease linguistic challenges and bridge cultural gaps so that every Ohioan can have a chance to thrive. We also need to work to strengthen our communities in general by working towards universal broadband and tech infrastructure, and to strengthen Ohio's job training and apprenticeship programs, giving more people the chance to succeed in a changing economy.
All right. Thank you so much for your time this evening. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
We're now going to move to the race for state Supreme Court judge candidates, and we are going to begin with Judge Jennifer Brunner.
Okay,
right,
good evening.
There you go. You now have your 2 minutes for the self-introduction. I just want to make sure you were with us.
All right, yes, thank you so much for having me this evening. I'm Judge Jennifer Brunner, a candidate for the Ohio Supreme Court. I'm currently a judge on the 10th District Court of Appeals, which is located in Franklin County. It's one of the 3 of the 12 appellate courts in the state that's located wholly within the county. Those are in Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. What especially we are dealing with in our court are administrative appeals that touch just about every community in the state. So running for the Ohio Supreme Court, I already have the experience of dealing with many state government issues, also having served as Ohio's first female Secretary of State from 2007 to 2011. I've managed a statewide agency and I've protected people's voting rights. I've served as a trial court judge in Common Pleas Court in Franklin County, starting our county's adult felony drug court known as the TIES program, which is treatment is essential to success. And during the time I served as Secretary of State, I was awarded the John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award for the work that my staff and I were doing in protecting Ohioans' rights to vote. I have 17 years of private practice experience, and I've been married to my husband, Rick, for 42 years. We have 3 grown children, 6 grandchildren, ages 9 and under. And we live in Columbus. We have a farm in Columbiana County in rural Northeast Ohio, south of Youngstown. I'm running for the office because I am concerned about making sure that any challenge to the districts that will be drawn according to a fair formula next year are not gerrymandered. And also I am very passionate about ending systemic racism in the criminal justice system in Ohio and working on, as a start, a statewide database to find demographic such as racial, gender differences in how people are sentenced for the same crime with the same record, as well as going all the way to the arrest process. And looking forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Judge Brunner. My apologies for mispronouncing your name there at the top. Your first question from the organization is about freedom of speech, and it reads, there are cases where some universities canceled speech of alt-right speakers. Do you think colleges in our state should take similar action?
Okay, please, it just cut out for a second. Some universities canceled.
And again, this was a prepared question. It says there are some cases at universities where they canceled speech of alt-right speakers. Do you think colleges in our state should take similar action?
Freedom of speech is freedom of speech. And while you would never find me at a Ku Klux Klan rally. Courts have routinely, because of protecting the rights of individuals for free speech, upheld the First Amendment, applied the First Amendment to allow even Ku Klux Klan rallies at state houses and on public grounds. So, where the court draws the line is when the speech is speech inciting violence. And so based on that question, first of all, I wouldn't be able to answer how a court would rule or how I would even rule, except to say, this is what I understand of the law. And it would depend upon the facts and the situation and whether or not there was evidence that there would be a propensity to incite violence. Again, the free speech is one of our greatest gifts that we have in our democracy in the United States. Many countries are extremely look at us with a lot of yearning because they don't have that ability. And it's the courts that protect those rights.
All right, thank you so much, Judge. We're now going to move to our next candidate, and that is Judge John O'Donnell. Judge O'Donnell, you will now have 2 minutes for a self-introduction, and then we have a prepared question for you. Is Judge O'Donnell with us? I've just been told on the chat that he is not with us yet, so we will move on now to Judge Judy French. Judge French, if you are with us, you will now have 2 minutes for your introduction, and then we have a prepared question for you. And I see her right there, so the floor is yours.
Yes, here I am. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for having me, and thank you so much for just being a part of the election process. I'm very grateful to groups like this that are willing to bring candidates together and inform the public. I am Judy French. I've been serving as one of your justices on the Ohio Supreme Court for the past 8 years. And in that time, I have cast votes in thousands of cases and have approached each one in an unbiased and impartial way. In simple terms, I think that judges have to be umpires. We call balls and strikes. We don't bring our own personal views into the conflicts before us. Before becoming a justice, I was a judge on the 10th District Court of Appeals in Franklin County. And before that, I was a lawyer. I was a lawyer for individuals, governmental entities, and businesses of all sizes. And what I wanted and what they wanted as my clients was they wanted stability. They wanted stability in the court system. They wanted judges, and certainly justices on the Ohio Supreme Court, to be consistent, to follow precedent, not to legislate from the bench. And so that has been my pledge for the past 8 years and will be my pledge going forward. During a campaign, we do talk a lot about judicial philosophy. And I think that just means that's just a reference to how a judge defines his or her role in the bench. And I define my role in a limited way. I need to show deference to the other branches of government. But just as importantly, I think judges have a duty to make the judiciary better. And I have also been part of reforms at the Ohio Supreme Court to make the judiciary better, to make it more equal, to make it more fair, to make it more open and accessible to everyone. So over the next 6 years, I plan to continue those efforts.
All right, thank you so much, Judge French. And your prepared question reads as follows. During the Senate confirmation hearing, Judge Amy Coney Barrett expressed the view that the best way to avoid racial discrimination is not to consider race. What is your opinion about this?
Well, I don't know the specific context that she was asked in. I think that's a pretty simple answer. Of course, on the appellate court, at the appellate level, we may not know the race of the individuals coming before us in terms of the case the cases being presented to us, for example, the criminal defendant, that one way to avoid discrimination obviously is not to consider race. But I think we have an obligation to do more as the Ohio Supreme Court. As I mentioned, I think we do have an obligation to do better and to do more. And I think that's one of the things that we have to do. And I'd like to focus in on over the next 6 years is addressing racial inequality and discrimination within the judiciary. You know, we have some authority over the Ohio judiciary, not entirely, but we write rules. And I think what we need to focus on over the next 6 years is establishing a uniform sentencing database, collecting that data from every court around the state of Ohio, collecting it in a uniform way, getting it electronically and putting it out there for everybody to see. We need more transparency in the judiciary. So I think we can't just not consider race in the cases before us. We've got to take a closer look to see what we really do have in the Ohio judiciary. And once we've got that transparent information about any inequality, that's how we address it, is with good data.
All right, thank you so much. I just got an update that Judge O'Donnell is now with us. Judge O'Donnell, if you can hear me, you now have 2 minutes for an introduction, and then we have a prepared question for you. So the floor is now yours, Judge O'Donnell.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm trying to start my video. My name is Judge O'Donnell. I appreciate you having me here tonight. I was first elected to the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas in 2002. Since then, I have been reelected 3 times, and now I'm running for the Ohio Supreme Court. I want the people on this call to know that each time I've been reelected, several local bar associations representing different segments of lawyers in our county do ratings of the candidates. And each time I've been consistently ranked as excellent by these various bar associations. And then this year, when these bar associations evaluated candidates for the Ohio Supreme Court, I was evaluated at a higher level than my opponent in this election. And the same is true for the Ohio State Bar Association. I am running against an incumbent justice of the Supreme Court, and the Ohio State Bar numerically ranked me as more proficient and more qualified than the opponent. The other thing I want to mention along those lines is that in this race, I'm only aware of 2 newspapers across Ohio that have done endorsement interviews and endorsements. And both of those newspapers, the Columbus Dispatch and the Cleveland Plain Dealer, have endorsed me in this election. So the people on this call, some of you may have come from another country, or your families before you came from another country, where there was either a democracy in name only or a pure authoritarian form of government.
15 seconds left.
That the primary thing that distinguishes authoritarian governments from real functioning democracies is the independence of the judicial branch. My focus is to be an independent jurist, uninfluenced by the policy preferences of the other 2 branches of government, and to give all of those before me, no matter where they fall on the ladder of society, a fair hearing. So
time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so your prepared question, Judge O'Donnell, Ohio has passed a heartbeat bill. Do you think abortion at the earlier stage can be prohibited under Roe v. Wade? That's your prepared question from the panel of organizers.
I would say under current law, no, for this reason. By the way, I don't have a case before me. A case may come before me and have some facts and law that I'm not aware of. But I can give you an off-the-cuff opinion based upon the very broad question that you just asked. In Roe versus Wade, it was established that in the first trimester of a pregnancy, it is the woman who has the most compelling interest, and the government's interest in getting involved in that pregnancy is minimal. So essentially, and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially it was hands off during the first trimester. Well, heartbeats, as I understand, can be detected as early as 7 weeks into a pregnancy. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, a woman might not even know she's pregnant by that time. Subsequent case law has made clear that restrictions on abortion cannot place an undue burden on a person's right to one. Well, what is more an undue burden than to say, if you want an abortion, you have to get it before you know you are pregnant? So I want to repeat, I cannot say what I would do in a particular case, but answering your broad hypothetical, I think my answer is pretty accurate.
Okay, thank you so much. We're now going to turn to follow-up questions from the audience and from our viewers tonight. The first one goes to Judge Bruner, and the question for you, Judge Bruner, is this: what are your thoughts on balances between stopping crime and preventing excessive use of police power? You will have 2 minutes to respond to this question.
I'm very, very aware of and concerned about issues that deal with search and seizure. When a police officer can stop you, detain you, make you get out of your car, search your car, or search your home or your property. Interestingly, right now, the Ohio Supreme Court, in the Ohio Supreme Court race, attack ads are running on behalf of Justice French against me about a case that I decided where I protected someone's Fourth Amendment rights because there was a warrant that was taken out that did not include the search of the man's home. What he did was awful. The case was tough. But the problem was that the affidavit only contained requests for a search of his office at the school where he worked, not his home. They tried to introduce evidence that he had the officer asking for the warrant had discussions with the judge, but none of that was on the record. I followed the law in that case. That went to the Ohio Supreme Court, and Justice French, as a member of that panel, essentially said that was wrongly decided, and they changed the law. Now they're using that case to file to levy attacks by television against my candidacy. And so what I would say to you is that what's paramount is the Constitution. And the police officers are trained to follow the Constitution. They must follow the Constitution, and it is the courts who must make sure that they do. Because if an officer doesn't follow the Constitution and they search you or your family member and they find nothing, the courts will never know about it. So sometimes we have to let bad actors sometimes we have to respect the rights of bad actors so that we're respecting and protecting the rights of everyone. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that response. Our next question goes to Judge French, and it's a longer one, so bear with me for a moment. It reads as follows: the top leaders are supposed to be role models of this country. However, based off the first presidential debate, our leaders are talking over each other, not giving each other a chance to speak their views, and seem to have no respect for each other. And the whole thing was just chaotic. Again, their words, not mine. If this is what our next leader of our country is going to be like, how are the citizens or the people going to look up to them? And you have 2 minutes, Judge French, to respond to that.
Well, I was disheartened by the debate as well. That certainly was not a model of civility. And I think that we can do better, at least in our judicial system. You know, the 4 candidates for the Ohio Supreme Court had something like a debate. It was more, I guess, an educational forum would probably be a better description, where we were each individually asked questions. Nobody was talking over anybody. We answered the questions directly. We took them seriously, and we answered them completely. So I think within at least the judicial system, it's important for us to be role models in the community and to show civility, at least within the legal profession. You know, when lawyers do present, whether it's to the Ohio Supreme Court or any other, we do expect them to be civil, and the best way we can show that civility is for us to be civil ourselves. So I'm proud to say that I've signed a clean campaign pledge for this campaign. And in my 4 campaigns, I have never run a negative ad and don't intend to do that this year. So to the extent that I can be part of a judicial system that models civility, I'm happy to do it.
All right, thank you so much for that response. Our last question in this race goes to Judge O'Donnell, and an audience member has asked Judge O'Donnell, why should voters support you rather than your opponent? You're going to have 2 minutes to respond to that.
The answer is easy, because I understand the judicial function and I'm willing to discharge it. My opponent said in a recent opinion from early 2020, as I recall, that Article 2, Section 15C of the Ohio Constitution is a directory provision only, safeguarded by the oath that legislators take to uphold it. That is the extreme of judicial passivity. It is, as Chief Justice John Marshall said in 1803, the year Ohio became a state, it is emphatically the province of the judicial department to say what the law is. That decision of his established the concept of judicial review, which essentially says that it is the judicial branch's duty, not just its power, but its duty to say what the law is when there is a dispute about the meaning of a law. You have to take the duty seriously and you have to be willing to discharge it. If you say, hey, I'm not going to question the legislators and whether they violated the bounds of the Constitution because they took an oath to the Constitution, you are not discharging your duty to the Constitution and the people of Ohio.
All right, thank you so much. And we want to say a big thank you to all the candidates running for State Supreme Court Judge for joining us this evening. Thank you all so much for being here with us. We are now going to turn to our races for state representative. The first candidate that we are going to hear from tonight is Sarah Bitter, excuse me. Sarah, you will have 2 minutes for an introduction, and then you will have 3 minutes to respond to a question. So the floor is now yours, Ms. Bitter. I think you're muted, Sarah.
All right, can you hear me now? Sorry about that.
We can hear you now.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, AAPI, for having me at this forum. I truly appreciate it. I am Sarah Bitter, and I am running for state representative in House District 27. House District 27 is in the eastern suburbs of Cincinnati in Hamilton County. It is in Sycamore school area, Sims Township. It goes into Loveland, Indian Hill, Terrace Park, Marymount, Newtown, Anderson Township, parts of, it's Mount Lookout, parts of Hyde Park, Columbia, Tusculum, and a little bit of East Walnut Hill. So it's in the eastern suburbs. I am a mom. I have 2 children that are living with a developmental disability. I am an attorney and I am a disability rights advocate. And I got in this race because I would like to create a disability, mental health, and addiction caucus in our legislature in Columbus. I am the Democratic endorsed candidate for that role as well. This is a really important race. The areas that I would like to focus on for this race, and if I am elected, are making sure that we address what's going to be occurring with regard to COVID. I'd like to work on healthcare. I'd like to work on making sure our public schools and all of our schools are funded properly. And I would like to work on making sure our small businesses survive. I believe that I would be a good candidate and that you should consider voting for me. And I hope that I can earn your vote because I understand the importance of making sure that all voices are counted. As a disability rights advocate, my role and my job and what I have dedicated my career to is making sure that people have access. People have access to jobs, to education, to the best things that our country has to offer. And I will be able to do that for the Asian American community as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Next was supposed to be Tom Brinkman, but I'm told that Mr. Brinkman is not here. So we are now going to move on to Aaron Rosilio. Aaron, you will have 2 minutes for an introduction followed by a question, and you'll have 3 minutes to respond to that. Aaron?
Hi, my name's Erin Rosiello, and I'm running to represent Ohio's House District 62 in Warren County. 62 is pretty much everything with the exception of Lebanon and Mason. So I cover all the way from Springboro, Franklin, Waynesville, down to Morrow, Hamilton Township, and Mainville. I'm a native of Southwest Ohio, and I have a family history of advocating for civil rights and social change, growing up with freedom rider parents that provided selfless examples of how ordinary citizens can bring about extraordinary change. I'm running for office because I think Ohio needs elected officials whose work reflects the interests and the needs of hardworking Ohioans and voters, families and voters, not corporations, not large money donors, or for pay-to-play favors. If I'm elected, some of the areas that I would like to focus on, first of all, helping establish a comprehensive and medically based consistent plan for Ohio to navigate the pandemic, healthy families for a healthy economy. I'd like to address public school funding, and in part, that's part of Ohio's greater revenue problem. I'd like to address healthcare access and quality for all Ohioans, and work to provide a living wage where families don't just get by, but they can actually thrive. Finally, one thing that I would like to focus on immediately is repealing House Bill 6, which was born out of corruption. In this current crisis, strengthening public education, providing equitable access to healthcare, and providing a living wage are all things
15 seconds.
that we need to accomplish if we want to build Ohio's economy. But we first have to start with medically directive and cohesive management of the pandemic.
All right, thank you. And your question from the panel is, healthcare is very important to Ohioans, but AAPIs experience unique health disparities, including difficulties in accessing care, language barriers, cultural sensitivities, and also medical affordability. Many of these issues were amplified with the recent COVID-19 pandemic. What would you do to address and improve health inequities specifically for AAPIs? And you'll have 3 minutes for that.
Okay, so healthcare, let's see, I'm sorry. Asian Americans experience 4 times higher case fatality rate than the overall population. Across the country, a high Asian American case fatality has emerged as another health disparity from COVID-19 impacting a minority population. So policymakers can help change these disparities by mandating standardized case and fatality reporting requirements and directing public health agencies to investigate why particular populations, including Asian Americans, face a seemingly heightened risk of death from COVID-19. A higher observed case fatality indicates either Asian Americans lack sufficient diagnostic testing, or face a higher risk of death from COVID-19 on average, or both. Importantly, these case fatalities do not reflect the population infection rate, which tends to be lower in Asian Americans. So for instance, Asian Americans comprise 12% of positive cases in San Francisco, despite making up nearly half the deaths. So I think that we need to track and watch specifically Asian Americans with regard to, let's say, COVID-19, and to address and improve health inequities, specifically for AAPIs, I would increase focus upon health screenings of Ohio's AAPIs, implement more systemic collection of disaggregated data on health that is specific to Asian subgroups. And this data will permit identification of social determinants of certain disease within APPI population, development of culturally appropriate strategies for screening and treatments for diseases, and great community involvement and commitment to better health.
All right, thank you so much. We are now going to move to Matt Nolan, the Warren County Auditor, who tonight, though, is serving as a surrogate for Scott Lips. So, Mr. Nolan, you have 2 minutes to speak on behalf of Scott Lips.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I am so thankful to not be running for office in the middle of COVID like all of you are. So congratulations that you're all almost done. I've been through it, but never in something like this. And I really wanted to come on tonight just to thank APAPA for putting this on and all the great work they do. My office, the Warren County Auditor's Office, had an intern last summer. Hope to have an intern again next summer. Just phenomenal people. Made our office better, makes our county better, and we're proud of that. Scott Lips is a dear friend of mine, and mostly I wanted to be on here to talk about Warren County because very few people on this call as representatives live in Warren County, but many of the guests I suspect do, and they move to Warren County for a reason. And when I talk to people that move to Warren County, they move to Warren County because it's so much better than the communities around us. Yet when I hear the speakers tonight, they want Warren County to look like the communities around us. We're trying to do the opposite. We do things different in Warren County. We do not want government involved in our lives. We want less government. And that's what's made Warren County so successful. When you look at the people leaving Hamilton County, you look at the people leaving Montgomery County to come to Warren County, it's not because they want more government, it's they want less government. They want less taxes. We have the lowest taxes in the area. We have the best schools. We have the best communities. And we think that we have done that by having less government, by trusting the people to take care of themselves, letting businesses, letting the private sector run things and not government. And the proof's in the pudding. There's no one that would deny that Warren County has been one of the fastest growing, most successful counties over the last 20 years in the state of Ohio. We do things
15
differently.
seconds left.
We'd encourage more people to join, follow the Warren County way, follow the way Scott Lips has led us. Good luck to all of you over the next few weeks, and I know you'll be all happy when it's done regardless. So thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. And there will be no follow-up question for you since you are serving as a surrogate this evening. So our appreciation to you for joining us on this call this evening. Next, we are going to turn to Mr. Cedric Denson. Cedric, you will now have 2 minutes to introduce yourself, and then I'll have a follow-up question after that. So the floor is yours, Cedric. We cannot hear you. I think you're muted. It still says mute on our end when I look at yours. Now I can hear you. Yep.
Oh, all right, great. It's so good to see everybody tonight. So many great friends. Thanks for allowing me to be with you. It's been a long time, but I am Cedric Denson, your representative for what we call the Fighting 33rd District that is in Hamilton County. And it is so good to be with you all today. I miss the opportunity to interact with the interns that we had. Of course, everything that's happened this year has not allowed us to do that, but we had a great time and also got to break bread on last year and just get to understand each other a lot more. And so I appreciate that opportunity. But I do serve in the 33rd House District, and that covers portions of Hamilton County. And it's been my freshman year, and we kind of hit the ground running. I've always thought that running for office was something that was just kind of ingrained in me just from everything that I did from the moment I left high school when I got involved with volunteering on a campaign. But what it did was it allowed me to give the opportunity to give back in a way that a community has given so much to me. And so I got involved working for a campaign, got involved working at City Hall, and then had the opportunity to run and go to the State House. And since being there, it has been one of the most awesome experiences that I've ever had. I never like to box myself in on issues because we have a lot of issues that go on that will always affect us in a lot of different ways. But some things that do stand out to me are disparities when I look across the state of Ohio, some of our disproportionate communities. I think about the environmental issues that are facing us, But I also just think about what it means for me to go to the State House and advocate for everybody so folks can lay down at the end of the day with a sense of pride, knowing that people are going to the State House working
15 seconds left.
For every issue. I have paid attention to just about everything. I know that this group has advocated for Senate Bill, I think it's 98 if I have the numbers right. There's so many numbers going on, but I'll continue to do that work and look forward to working with you all. Thanks for having me tonight.
And Cedric, your question from the panel is, in a Gallup poll, 30% of AAPI surveyed reported incidents of employer discrimination, the largest of any group, with African Americans coming in at number 2 at 26%. So the panelists are wanting to know, what would you do in your elected role to prevent employer discrimination against minorities, particularly against AAPIs? Mr. Denson, you will now have 3 minutes to respond to that question.
Thank you for the question, Kyle. It's certainly, those are alarming statistics that we read and then we find out, and it's something that we should not be proud of. Fortunate or unfortunate enough, because of the things that we've learned with the incident of the George Floyd incident, prior to that, if you take a look at my track record, you see some of the things that I've introduced and or supported when it comes to these things. But specifically to this, what I would say is, we and I'm a member of the Ohio Legislative Black Caucus, but we introduced a bill to see racism as a public health crisis in the state of Ohio. And I often said what that meant was not just looking at it as one way. What it did was gave us an opportunity to see that we have to admit that we have a problem here in the state of Ohio, which is why we read the statistics that we did. Once you can then read and digest what that means, a lot of people say, well, it's just a resolution, it's just words on paper. Well, that's not how I saw it. What it was an opportunity to allow communities like you all to come in and express the disparities, the situations that you've went through. And what that does is it gives us an opportunity, because we all have the opportunity to introduce legislation at any point. But I think this is where the advocacy point and the interaction with the legislator becomes important. If you are sitting there listening to experience after experience and story after story, perhaps what will then happen is, if we can get that resolution passed, we will have everybody on record of being a little more human and understanding where we are. And so then when we start to break down those barriers about employment discrimination, we will get somewhere. But we have got to really take this from a humanistic standpoint, that we've got some problems, but we first got to admit it. And so I was proud to be one of the sponsors of that resolution, to get us on record for realizing we've got so many problems and so many roads to go down to deal with all the policy things. It doesn't mean it's all going to happen in one General Assembly, and it doesn't mean it's all going to happen at once. But we have got to do some things differently if we're going to expect a different result. That's what I've been committed to, and that's what I'll continue to push for. And we are working extremely hard with this new speaker that was just appointed to hopefully get that resolution passed in the House before the end of this General Assembly.
All right, Cedric, thank you so much. And I want to take a moment to reset. We need to go back to Sarah Bitter because it was a mistake, an oversight on my part. I apologize. I did not actually ask you your question. Your introduction was so good, I thought that we were ready to move on, but there was, don't read into that at all. It was a mistake on my part, so I apologize to the panelists, the organization, and most importantly, to you, Ms. Bitter. So you will have 3 minutes now to answer this question. And the question is, what is your view on reproductive justices and heartbeat bills? Oh, I think you are on mute.
There we go. All
there
right.
we go.
It requires me to get permission, and I keep hitting it, but it didn't come back. Okay. My position is that I have been endorsed, I will say, by Planned Parenthood. I do believe that it is really important that healthcare decisions are between a patient and their doctor. I think that's a really, really important thing. Many people do not know, many women do not know when they're pregnant, obviously. So I think that it's important that this, that this is something that's kept privately for a person and their doctor. I do believe that we need to protect the ability for people to make their own decisions, and that government shouldn't be making decisions for women on these types of issues. I know that, it's a really touchy subject for everyone. It's an extremely touchy subject for everyone. It's a very personal decision for many people. I have 2 children that are living with developmental disabilities. My children were, they were planned. I have spent my life caring for them and making sure that they get the best that they can possibly get so they can lead the best lives possible. And I fight for people with disabilities. I fight so that people can go to school, have jobs, live in their community, be accepted for who they are. So I fight for everyone to be valued and for their lives to be valued. But when it comes to a woman and her decision on her body, I believe that we have to follow the law. And I believe that these types of laws are meant to create divisive political stances so that people get elected, namely the opposite party of what I'm running in. So I think that these are just cases that constantly get challenged. They're taking up time that we need to be spending on protecting people and making sure they have health care, jobs, making sure they survive through this COVID experience with the pandemic. And as a legislator, I will work with the Democratic caucus. Like I said, I'll stand with women and their privacy. And last thing I want to say is that there are a lot of people who don't necessarily consent. When they get pregnant, they might not always consent, right? There are people who are getting pregnant who may have been raped. They could have been victims of incest and other crimes. And these kinds of laws are extremely dangerous for very vulnerable people and for women. So
15 seconds left.
Every law that I look at as a legislator, I will look at it very carefully and I will scrutinize it before I would go to pass something like that. But that is my position on that particular piece of legislation at this time as a candidate.
Thank you so much. We are now going to turn to our questions from audience members. The first one goes to Aaron Rosiello. And Aaron, your question is, how can you provide more resources to raise the education quality from K through 12 so that schools do not have to pass levies every 5 years? Do you plan to provide more resources to college education as well? And you'll have 2 minutes to respond to that question, Aaron. You're on mute.
There we go. Okay. So the question was, in a nutshell, how would we fund the improvements for the public schools, K through 12? Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. So what we keep seeing is what appears to be a battle between the school districts and the families. And, the school districts have a levy and then the families, fight passing the levy. We see this going on. There were 8 school districts in my district. And at the primary, I think half of them were running a levy at the time. It's a little bit bigger than just raising property taxes. It's bigger because there is, we found 20 years ago and multiple times that the way in which we fund our schools is not constitutional. What I would recommend is looking at the bigger picture, and this is going to become more important in light of the pandemic, and that is our revenue problem in Ohio. We have a revenue problem because for the last 20 years, we have provided tax breaks to the top 1% in Ohio. And these tax breaks have cost us billions of dollars over the course of time. So what happens is, where do we cut? What is the go-to for the current majority? The go-to is education, that and healthcare and our local governments. So that being said, I recommend rolling back some of the tax cuts that have been implemented only on our highest earners, our millionaires in Ohio, that currently pay less as a percentage of their income than do middle-class families, hardworking families making $50,000 a year.
15 seconds left.
So I think that we fixed the bigger problem. They've done it in New Jersey. Let's roll back the tax breaks to the wealthy. That will bring money back to the schools.
All right, thank you so much. Our next question is for Cedric Denson. And Cedric, your question from the audience is, how do you revive the economy and create more high-tech jobs here in Ohio so that college grads are willing to stay here instead of going to places like New York, California, or a little closer by, and we talk about Chicago. So you have 2 minutes to respond to that. Ooh, we can't, oh, 1 second. I think he's on mute.
Okay, sorry, it wasn't allowing me to unmute. I think the host is in control. But
Oh, okay.
That's one of the biggest problems that we have. And this is where, as much as I want to leave it out of the conversation, it has to be a part of it. This is part of the problem we have with in the State House right now. Until we have a majority of folks that understand what those kind of jobs mean, we will never be able to retain that type of talent in the state of Ohio. I have been a part of a lot of different conversations, a lot of different groups looking to improve this. The reality is we don't take opportunity to retain some good paying jobs here. We're going to continue what we see. One is that we have kids that may go here, but they go to school here in Ohio with the very intention of leaving, if we're able to even do that. But the truth of it is that most don't even want to experience going to school here in the state of Ohio, which tells us we don't even stand a snowball's chance of retaining them here and with a workforce. I think how we build a workforce here in the tech industry is that we just become very intentional about it. But the reality is it's not without a majority of school of thought in the legislature, in the House or the Senate, and somebody who understands what that means that can sign that pen as a governor. We will never get there. I mean, that's just the reality. Is it something I support? Absolutely. The question is, how do we get there? We get there with the majority of folks that think like that. These conversations have come up in committees. These conversations have been had on the floor of the House. We have not seen an appetite for this to happen. There are a lot of people that are, I know people that are flooding to California because there are a lot of opportunities there in the tech industry. We have done very good here in Hamilton County, which is something that I'm proud of, about building an infrastructure, about what it means for tech jobs, specifically when it comes to those in disproportionate communities, those that are a little at the bottom in more cases. That's not enough. The question is, how do we grow that across the state? So at the end of the day, we're doing what we need to do to bring in as much as we can to continue to thrive and grow. Because another thing is, that's what big companies look at, what we're talking about and how we're making
10 seconds left.
Point when they decide if they're going to relocate here. That is not a conversation that big companies are feeling confident in. We're not talking about it. We're not doing it. It's something I support and something I would push for. I've done it and I'll continue to do so.
All right, thank you, Mr. Denson. And our last question for the state representative candidates tonight goes to Sarah Bitter. And Sarah, your question from the audience is, if you become state rep, would you try to make it so that Ohio public school districts receive an increased amount of funding from the government? And you'll have 2 minutes to respond.
An increased amount of funding. I guess I'll answer it like this. I would stop the defunding of our public schools. So that's how I'll answer that question. Our public school, over the last 10 years, more than 10 years, the state legislature has been cutting public school funding, which has been to the detriment of our schools, of our children in our schools. 90% of children in Ohio go to public schools. So public schools are really, really important. So yes, I will absolutely fight to make sure that our public schools are funded. I will fight to make sure that they have, CARES Act money that they need during COVID, make sure that teachers are kept and retained, and we hire more teachers if we need them, substitute teachers, making sure that they have PPE and cleaning materials in the schools. And there are really big issues in schools right now for people who are or English language learners or non-English speakers, right? People who are doing online virtual schooling who don't necessarily, maybe their parent or the student does not necessarily understand English as a first language. I have my son coming in here right now, and I apologize. Speaking of son, sorry. Sorry. But absolutely, I will fight for public education. I will fight for school funding for all schools, for all students. Obviously, I don't want, money not to go to private schools as well. Everybody needs funding, and every school needs to be taken care of, and children need to have a good education. It's so important for our Ohio students from all backgrounds. We have a beautiful, diverse state. Hamilton County is a beautiful, diverse county. I am so proud of our county. And I will fight for all the people in this county, all the people of all diverse backgrounds, and I'm proud of that. And yes, I'll fight for public education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bitter. And I think that was the moment of the night, seeing your son come in there and join us during your response to that question. This concludes my portion of the debate. There are still 2 more candidates that we are going to hear from, but unfortunately, I have to get back to work because I want to keep my paycheck. So I am going to leave you all, but I know that I am leaving you in wonderful hands with the moderators who will be stepping in. Thank you once again to APAPA for inviting me out here tonight for this wonderful conversation of ideas. If I can ever be of assistance again, please let me know. I'm going to get back to work and turn things over to the next group of moderators. Best of luck to all the candidates on Election Day coming up very soon. Have a good night, guys.
Thank you. We are so grateful to you, Kyle. Kyle, thank you, Kyle. He hasn't had a break in hours, and it was awfully good for him. Good of him to stay here when he realized he was going to be on an extra shift. We are now turning to Charmaine McGuffey, our candidate for.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. You have, I think it's 2 minutes to talk about yourself. And I look forward to it. And I want to thank everyone who's on the panel now for coming over and joining us. We're very grateful for your participation. Charmaine, by the way, I love your new hairdo. And
thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And thank you very much, AAPI. And thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm Charmaine McGuffey. I'm running for sheriff of Hamilton County. I've spent a 33-year career in the sheriff's department. And in that 33 years, I've worked nearly every facet of the sheriff's office, and our sheriff's office here in Hamilton County is quite large. And for people that may not know, your sheriff's office touches virtually every aspect of the criminal justice system, because the sheriff governs the jail, the courthouse, and law enforcement for unincorporated areas. We have the 3rd largest sheriff's department in the state of Ohio. And as the major, which is the rank I rose to, I was promoted by 3 different sheriffs to sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and then major. And as the major, I commanded a staff of 600 personnel and 1,400 prisoners. What I did as the major is I brought in reform, because I recognized that our system here, particularly in Hamilton County, was in a 1950s model, and we needed to move away from that model. And that meant bringing in the Women's Heroin Recovery Program, the Men's Veterans Program, and a program for men who are exiting our jail so that they can get services, understand how to connect to get their driver's license, pay their child support, all things designed to keep people from recidivism, from coming back to our jail and cycling back through one of the most expensive parts of the criminal justice system, which is incarceration. We're incarcerating millions of people. And I believe we can move those people along, and I believe we can create safer communities by doing it. Because as we put our energy and our time into getting people to follow the rules, become productive citizens and so forth, we enhance the safety of all of our communities, all of the suburbs, everyone that we serve in our sheriff's office. I am about accountability, transparency, and justice reform. And I tell people, I'm a law and order candidate. Certainly I am. The officers know it, the prisoners know it, anybody that's worked with me knows it. But what they also know is that I'm also a justice reform candidate, because I believe that the two do go together. I think it's time for us to start embracing that idea. We frankly need to start healing our community. We need to start healing our relationships with law enforcement and the communities that they serve. And we start doing that by, one, being transparent. And by inviting people in. I'm going to create a citizens review panel that will allow citizens who have an interest in coming into our sheriff's office and seeing how it's run and seeing with full transparency what we do, why it's done. And I'm also going to create a liaison unit so that when people need our help in the criminal justice system, there is someone there to walk you through that, to actually talk to you, to be your advocate and not answer the phone and just say, well, check the computer program. You know, it's all on the screen. A lot of people, you know, some people don't have computers. Some people are skilled at that, some people not. But sometimes you have questions that a computer can't answer. Yeah, our criminal justice system is very, very complex. I spent 33 years in the system, and as major of the jail and court services, I was changing that system. I'm about creating diversity and inclusion in our sheriff's office. We have a very, very low record of diversity in our officers, while at the same time, the people that are incarcerated in our criminal justice system tend to be minority. They tend to be African-American, they tend to be minorities, and we need to address that. And we need to tell the truth about it, and we need to share our data, which is exactly what I intend to do as the next sheriff of Hamilton County. So,
okay, thank you very much, Charmaine. I have a question for you.
Okay.
I'm not as smooth or as good as Kyle. So here's our question. And thank you very much for what you've said. Asian Americans have been subjected to increasing racial bias and harassment in the past few months. The National Stop AAPI hate group has documented 2,583 incidents of anti-Asian American discrimination from March to August 2020. What's your plan to address racial national origin bias and create a safe environment as a sheriff for all Ohio, especially because we're right here, for AAPI's Asian American and Pacific Islanders who really are being treated differently right now?
And that is a great question. And the first way that we address the way that minorities, people of color are treated in our society is by changing the culture of our police departments. When those cultures do not respect that diversity exists, that there is implicit bias, and we need implicit bias training so that our officers and anybody who represents our sheriff's department, when they approach you, they need to know right away that, you know, they need to follow some very good guidelines on using good manners, on treating you respectfully, on equal treatment. And again, with respect to the implicit bias training and also de-escalation training, you know, our officers need to be, and this is something I'm addressing with the sheriff's office, is that's why we need diversity in our ranks. Because right now, our sheriff's office is made up of, I think our diversity rate is less than 10%, less than 10% of an 850 strong sheriff's office, mostly all white men. And, you know, we need to change that, because as we change that and as we communicate, we begin to understand why other people have the issues maybe that they do or struggle with something that they struggle with. And we quite frankly increase the way that we approach people with respect. And that's what I did as the major. I insisted on that. I have zero tolerance for excessive use of force. I will hold officers accountable. And that's a part of changing that culture, that officers realize that when you speak to citizens or approach them in a disrespectful way, there are consequences to that. And those complaints, if we get them, or if we get suggestions from the public, those will be taken very seriously, and you will know the outcome. Versus some police departments and the sheriff's department now, which may or may never tell you what happened to your issue or complaint that you brought forward. So those are the ways that I would address how people of diversity are treated by law enforcement.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming and for answering these questions so fully. We
Sure.
now have Hal.
Yeah, this is Lin. I will take over from now.
Thank you.
Hi, we save the best to the last. Just kidding. We have our Hamilton County Commissioner, Denise Driehaus, to, she's actually running a re-election of commissioner uncontested, but we still like to hear about her views on the issues we care about. So Denise, you first have 2 minutes self-introduction.
Thank you. I do have an opponent on the ballot. He's not in attendance this evening, but I am opposed, just so you know, but I appreciate that. So thank you so much for organizing this event. It's a real pleasure to be with you. So I'm Denise Driehaus. I'm the president of the Hamilton County Commission. I have served on the commission for almost 4 years. I'm in my first re-election campaign for the commission and on the ballot this year with all these great people. I mean, you've seen a lot of members of the Democratic team. We are running in a coordinated campaign together, and it's a really prideful moment, I think, for all of us to be in coordination with one another and messaging about the things that we think are really important to the citizens of Hamilton County. Prior to serving in this role, I was a state representative, and before that, I was a small business owner. So I'm just going to focus on 2 things because I don't know what my question is. And 2 things that we've done that I think are relevant to some of the questions that you've been asking the other candidates. The one is when I first came to the county commission, Todd Portune and I established the Department of Economic Inclusion, and we had an Economic Inclusion Advisory Council formed to make sure that our Director of Economic Inclusion had a wide breadth of knowledge to the work. And so in forming the group, we made sure that many people were at the table, including the African American Chamber, the Hispanic Chamber, the Chinese Chamber, and the Indian Chamber. And people with disabilities are represented, women's groups are represented, but you can see that diversity in Hamilton County means just that. It's everybody. And the idea of the Economic Inclusion Council was to make sure that we have informed decisions about employment, about contracting, about the work that the county does, because we need to make sure that we do our work to welcome everyone into the work we do, no matter who you are in Hamilton County. So I was very proud of that initiative, and that's been going now for 3.5 years. And the other thing that's relevant, I think, to some of the questions is we recently declared racism a public health crisis in Hamilton County. There are 3 things we're doing, and I'll run through them quickly. One is a disparity study to level set and see how we're doing when it comes to including people in the growth of the county. The other is making sure that the sheriff's office has active bystander training, something Charmaine referenced, implicit bias training. It's similar, but a little bit different. But I've talked to Charmaine about this, and we are very similarly situated when it comes to some of the reforms in the jail. And the last one is expanding the Office of Economic Inclusion and Equity to make sure that we are being even more aggressive than we already have been when it comes to, again, employment, contracting, and really just the work of the county.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Driehaus. We do have a prepared question for you. So the benefits of diversity and inclusion in institutions have been well studied and shown to promote productivity, creativity, profitability, and even employee engagement and retention. Yet AAPIs have been noticeably excluded from leadership positions in businesses or government, many times due to structural bias or institutional racism. What would you do to promote the diversity and the inclusion of AAPIs in leadership roles?
So I kind of just answered the question in my opening statement, because the resolution declaring racism a public health crisis does the 3 things I mentioned. It also talks about some of these structural problems that we have in the county. It's structural racism. And so it plays out in health disparities. It plays out in employment. It plays out in a lot of different ways. But let me say that I think some of the work that we've done in the last few years on the commission, it does what I just explained, but also it's a bit of a culture shift where we say, we don't want to be monolithic. We don't want to all look the same. We don't want to all think the same, because that's not where the strength is. The strength is when you have different people with different experiences and different opinions to inform decisions. And so it's a culture shift. It's a different way of thinking about the work of government. And I think, especially with Todd and with the current commission, I mean, I started when Chris Monzel and Todd Portune and myself, now it is myself, Victoria Parks, and Stephanie Dumas. So all women and 2 women of color on the county commission. So we have changed dramatically. And I do think it's to the benefit of the citizens of the county to have that kind of diversity in leadership roles. And lastly, let me say that one thing the Board of County Commissioners does is appoint people to 30 boards that we oversee. Todd and I, when I first came in, we're very intentional about the diversity on those boards. And so of those boards, 78% were either people of color or women. And so it went a great way to say that the Port Authority and the Zoo Board and the SORTA Board, they all have to have a diversity of thought, and that strengthens the ability of the boards to do their work.
Thank you, Commissioner Driehaus. So now I will turn to Ms. Hao Cong, Treasurer of APAPA, Ohio, to do a closing. Thanks for everyone to stay so late with us.
Thank you.
You guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, everyone. On behalf of Ohio APAPA Cincinnati chapter, I would like to give me my heartfelt thanks to all of the candidates and the wonderful audience. I know your time is precious. You could be anywhere else but here, but you chose to be here. So thank you so much. Special thanks to our wonderful moderator, Kyle. He's amazing. I was his timer and he could fire me in no time. Technical support, my wonderful technical support, Wen Yuan, and of course, Lin Qi and Michelle Yang. Without you guys, this event would not happen. I also like to express my deep appreciation to our sponsors, Asia, ACA, CL, USA, and OCAA. Thank you for your continued support and trust along the way. Please go out and vote. Together, we can make a big difference. Thank you all for coming and good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. So this concludes our forum tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night. Thank you again for coming.
Great. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. No, thank you.